Hello, welcome to Senior Project. I'm your professor for this course, Sarah Jacobs. In Senior Project, you will be learning how to craft a professional artist lecture, and you will be presenting your lecture in various drafts throughout the semester. In this lecture that you're watching right now, I am going to begin by giving you some basics of the class, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty of recommendations for your lecture. So our class will meet just about every other week on Mondays. The reason we're not meeting every week is that I have left aside some time for field trips. Now, of course, we can't go on real field trips in this course, so we will be doing virtual Zoom field trips to artist lectures. And so you'll get to see real artists, real working artists out in the field who are established giving lectures about their work. And what I want you to do whenever you see one of these field trip lectures is write up a one-page summary of how you think they did, not in terms of whether or not you like their artwork, but in terms of how they presented their lecture, what you thought worked well with it, what didn't work well, what you might have done differently. So you're writing up a critique of their lecture structure and the way that they presented their lecture. Okay, so here it is the partnering organization, Tiny Talks through Small Mall. We have partnered with them, so we've already paid for your entry fee into all of these Zoom lectures. Now, unfortunately, these lectures do not necessarily happen during our class periods on Mondays, and so they tend to be Thursdays, Fridays, or Saturday nights. Luckily, there are going to be way more than 5 of them. I would like you to attend 5, and it's 5 times that we don't meet to accommodate during the regular course period to accommodate you doing this instead. But you have the option of which ones you will pick. So you have to do 5. There will be more than 5. The partnering organization, Small Mall, and Casey Droege Cultural Productions is still putting together their lineup for the fall of artist lectures. And so I'll give you the artist lecture schedule for the first half of the semester. I should have it today and have it posted. And no later than midterms, we get the schedule for the second half. Okay. Now, I understand that some of you may have obligations on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. So if that is the case and you're not able to attend any of these lectures, unfortunately, you can find another organization lots of organizations right now are having virtual artist lectures that are synchronous, happening in Zoom so that you can ask questions at the end of them. If you do attend one outside of Casey Droege, please let me know in advance for my approval because I'm going to be in the Casey Droege ones to take attendance, and I wouldn't necessarily be in another one. Okay, so just let me know when you're in these. Please also take a screenshot of yourself in the Zoom meeting so that I know that you attended and hand that in with your essay. Okay, the reason I'm doing this 5 times is because we normally would go on a few field trips. We'd go listen to lecturers on campus. We'd go listen to lecturers in the city giving artist lectures. And this is to replace that. But also, I think it would be a little bit monotonous to meet every single week and hear the same artist lectures over and over. And of course, we're tinkering with them and improving them as the semester goes on. But I wanted to spice up the class a little bit, add a little variety. I still believe I've factored in enough weeks of meeting synchronously as a group for you to present your lectures that you will have really excellent lectures by the end of the semester. Okay. I also want you to turn in a resume or a CV in this class, and it's 5% of your grade, but I also do this as a service to you. I know you are graduating soon. I want you to have a really stellar document to go out there and apply for exhibitions or apply for jobs, apply for gigs, whatever your discipline has. So there's a big difference between a resume and a CV. Some of you should turn in a resume. Some of you should turn in a CV. CVs are used, and they stand for curriculum vitae, which stands for basically everything you've done in your life, that relates to your career. Whereas a resume is more of a summary. So I think most people know what a resume is. It's about a page. Sometimes it might go into 2, but that might be pushing it a little bit. And a CV is very different. A CV is used by fine artists, it's also used by professors, and it's used in a few other fields as well. Now, if you're a graphic designer or an art educator, you're going to want to do a resume. Now, if you are a fine artist, or if you are something else, but you also want to have a secondary sideline business where you exhibit your work, maybe you're a art professor, but you're also a practicing artist, or you're a graphic designer, but you also want to exhibit your work, then you want to have a CV as well for those applications for exhibitions. Okay, and a CV can be really quite long. I'm 36 years old, and my CV is already 7 pages long, because you list everything that you've done, every solo show, every group show, every artist residency you've done, every grant that you've received. Anything that you've done that relates to your field would be on a CV. And so it quickly gets much, much, much longer. And I've known people at the end of their careers who had 20, 30 page, not 30, that's ridiculous, but around 20 page CVs by the time they were quite elderly. And we will talk more about resumes and CVs around midterms. Now, into artist lectures. Here I am doing an artist lecture in London. Sometimes an artist lecture will actually happen in a gallery with the artwork right there, like in this example. And much of the time, an artist lecture will happen with PowerPoint, so you can show any kind of artwork from any time in your career without having to bring it to the space. A lot of it will happen on PowerPoint. And this year, of course, lots of people are doing their artist lectures over Zoom. I have done 15 artist lectures in my life so far. So this is something that happens really frequently. I would say happens a little bit more than once a year if you are doing well. And if you're an art education person, then this class is very important too, because you will be presenting information not necessarily about your own artwork, but about artwork to students on a daily basis. If you're a graphic designer, then this class will help you kind of pitch yourself to clients and to prospective firms. This is all about talking about your work, highlighting your work in a good way. So if sophomore review was more about you analyzing your work and determining what you needed to improve about it, senior project is more kind of about bragging, kind of showing off what you've done. This is like your golden moment. This is the end of your time here at Carlow, and you're ready to show off what you've done to the world. Okay, so it's a little bit more celebratory and a little bit less critical, although you can obviously, of course, be realistic in your lecture as well. But an artist lecture generally is meant to celebrate the artwork of the artist and show it off to the audience. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, I put this picture here to show a person looking at a lot of artwork. I want you to lay out all of your work, either physically, literally, or have images of them on your computer all together, and figure out, of all that work, how do you want to group it in this lecture? Which ones do you want to include? Which ones do you want to exclude? Now, you do not have to show everything you've ever done. I think it makes more sense to either show work that is in relation to what you plan to do after you graduate, because you'll also, in your lecture at the end, talk a little bit about your plans for the future. Or you can talk about the work that you're most excited about, the work that you think sparkles the most in your portfolio, right? So now, recommendations for how to go about structuring this lecture. Now, there is a certain structure that everybody's going to go by, and of course that is introduction, body, conclusion, just like an essay. But you should also introduce the structure of the lecture in addition to the lecture introduction to the topic. So you may note at the very beginning of this video that you're watching right now, this video, I told you about how I was going to structure this video. Remember I said that we would start discussing the class as a whole, and then I would get into the nitty-gritty of this part, how you go about structuring the lecture, and now it's happening. So I find that giving just a 1 or 2 sentence explanation about what's going to be happening in the lecture can be very comforting to the viewer. Otherwise, you just jump in, they're like, what the hell am I looking at here? Like, what is this? So give a brief introduction to the structure of the lecture, then introduce the topic of the lecture, and then of course the body is going to be the main point where you show the work, talk about it in any of the possible narrative manners that I will be discussing in a moment, and then your conclusion. Often a conclusion would be one in which you kind of remind the audience of your introductory subject and kind of remind them of how you've proven the point over the course of the body of the lecture. It's very much like an essay. Another thing you could do in the conclusion is kind of lead off into a new idea. Like you could say, well, as I've explained through this lecture, I've proven blah, 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 and this leads me to kind of this, what I'm going to be doing next. And talk about what you're moving forward into, perhaps. Now, the body. There are lots of different ways that you could structure your lecture. Some people just do a straight chronological lecture. What did they do first? What did they do second? What did they do third? Some people categorize the artwork that they're going to talk about based on topic. And that could be based on the medium, like here are the ceramics I've done, maybe chronologically, but within all the ceramics all together, all the paintings all together, all the drawings all together, and then maybe those are chronological or maybe they're not, I don't know, within those topics. So you could pick either one of those. You can also talk about your work in an improvement-based manner. So some students in the past in this lecture have shown work side by side to talk about how they've improved over time. And in that, I don't want you to be horribly critical of yourself in the way that you talk about yourself. You could talk about the ways that you've improved rather than talking about all the deficits that existed. It's the same, you're saying the same thing either way, but you're saying it in a more kind of positive way that shows that you kind of are focusing more on the growth and the way that you've improved rather than just kind of dissing yourself, And we'll work on this over the course of the semester too. So that's another possible way to talk about your work in this. Some people have made their lectures very biographical. So for example, I had a student a few years ago whose work was arranged fairly chronologically, but the way that he talked about the work was really interesting. He talked about it in terms of almost a hero's journey story. Do you know much about the way that legends are structured? It's this idea of a hero's journey is one in which kind of the hero sets out and faces obstacles and faces other obstacles, and in the end they succeed. But anyway, the person was talking about how when he was young he had a speech impediment, and so he also had a learning disability, and he was told that he was wrong about things frequently, and it was people correcting him, but it was really frustrating, to be corrected so frequently. And so he said that he was a good drawer in high school. He did a lot of animation, manga kind of things, and then he got into college, and he, for the first time, was really getting critical feedback on his work. And so his the foil in the in the story was this professor who used to work here named Bill, and the student talked about how he had so much pushback with Bill because Bill would critique his work, and all he was hearing was people correcting him his whole life, and so he would basically do the opposite of Bill's advice in the critiques. And then he went to AIP, Art Institute of Pittsburgh, where he got lots of kind of criticism as well, because that's the whole point of education, is to improve, and so that's why people give critical feedback. And so the student then really started to get better, but he was still kind of pushing against this idea of taking his feedback. And so eventually in the story he realized that the professor with whom he had had an adversarial relationship was actually doing him a favor and trying to improve his artwork, and if he had listened to him, he could have gotten to the point where he was a lot faster. And so in the end, he became a really excellent artist, and he actually invited the professor to his lecture. And so it was a very biographically based piece. I also had a student in the past who entire lecture was written through the idea of spite, about how they did things kind of out of spite, but sort of in a joyful way, and how that related to their artwork, and so I'm not going to go into all the details, but try to think of a narrative way to frame your lecture, because it will become a lot more engaging for the audience to listen to a lecture that has narrative within it. People hear the term, let me tell you a story, and suddenly their ears perk up in a way that they don't when you hear, let me show you a bunch of bullet points. Right? And so narrative really can help a lecture, an audience member stay engaged. Okay, another way you could formulate your lecture is to be informative about a process or a subject matter. So I've had students do this in the past, where the lecture for one ceramicist was based on different kind of firing techniques that she used very frequently. And so in that lecture, she walked us through the process of these firings using her own work as an example and showing her work transition over time. So it really was an artist lecture, but it was sort of in the shell of an informative lecture. And with that one, I had to push her to talk more about her own work because she wanted to make it so much like a demonstration. Right? So you do want it to really be about your work, but you can frame it in this idea of kind of process-oriented explanation. Now, I had another student whose work was all about a specific subject matter, which was Asian American representation. And so she, instead of talking about saying this, in this artwork I did this, and this artwork I did this, and this artwork I did this, she talked about the subject matter throughout, and she used the artworks as examples, but of course she did pause and explain the artworks as well. But it was inside the shell of this explanation of the topic, of the subject matter. Okay, so there are many different ways that I just described that you could structure the body of your lecture, and I look forward to discussing that with you soon, and I look forward to your thoughts about how you might structure your lecture, and to seeing the artwork that you plan to include in it, and thoughts about how you will arrange that in terms of chronologically or topic-based. And please remember, in our lectures, there is no reason to use language that is unclear. Try to be as direct and clear as possible so that your audience members will really understand what you're trying to get across to them, particularly if some of the audience members might not be from the studio arts community. They may not understand some of the terminology, so be prepared to explain some of the technical terminology to your audience, and plain language is always preferable. Thank you.